All right. So let's get started, Josh. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing good, man. Doing good. Just, following the NBA offseason so far. It's been a lot of movement, been a lot
Yeah.
of trades, been a lot of signings. So let's get into about the Wizards. All right. So the first thing I want to ask you about, um, Bradley Beal signed a max contract, 251 million with a no trade clause. And he is the 10th player in NBA history with a no trade clause. LeBron, Kevin Garnett, Kobe, Dirk, Dwayne Wade, Carmelo Anthony, John Stockton, David Robinson, Tim Duncan. Only players to ever have a no trade clause. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, so I mean, it's pretty obvious reading that list which name doesn't belong there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, no shots to my guy, but it's Bradley Beal. Um, and I just don't get like what that type of negotiation would sort of look like. Like generally when you're negotiating a contract, there's sort of a give and take, but it sort of feels like the Wizards just were so insistent on keeping him that they were going to give him whatever he wanted. And I just don't understand the benefit of making. I mean, Bradley Beal right now is the most powerful player in the NBA. He has more organizational control than any other player in the league, just by contract definition. Um, he's gonna. I mean, this is gonna hold the Wizards hostage for the foreseeable future. And you know, really, unless they get Kevin Durant, which seems unlikely.
Yeah.
Um, the way I always felt was that Beal was ultimately going to ask for a trade, but he wanted to get paid first because we see in today's league it's becoming easier and easier and easier to um, get traded with multiple years left on our contract. It depends on the situation. If there's not a deal available, like that's happening with KD, sometimes you don't. But Beal's not that caliber of player, and you see like with Donovan Mitchell, it just looks like he's going to wind up getting moved. Um, and you know, I think it's naive of the Wizards to not understand that that was probably what's going to go on with Beal. But now, I'd say the over under for when he asks for a trade is 18 months.
Yeah.
Um, I'd say the deadline of the following season, I would probably say beforehand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and when that happens, the Wizards are going to be hamstrung because instead of being able to find the team with the best package for him, they're going to have to trade him for 30 cents on the dollar.
Yeah. I mean, I would say this, just money aside, the no trade clause could help him go to a team that he wants to because he can deny a trade to a certain team, and then he gets to pick his destination ultimately
Right.
if he plays it right.
Right. And that's why it's a great move for Beal and doesn't make sense at all for the Wizards. I mean, think about it. Think about it right now with think about it with Kevin Durant right now. So it doesn't look like a deal is going to come together. And my guess is that he stays in Brooklyn. But say hypothetically he did have a no trade clause, right? The Nets, there were reports that the Nets took calls from over half the teams in the NBA, which makes sense, right? If Kevin Durant is available, any responsible GM should just make the phone call, even if you're not sure what it's going to look like, to say, hey, what does it look like? And the Nets, are picking up the phone. They were negotiating with over the half of the league. Kevin Durant only had two places he wanted to go, Phoenix and Miami. If
Yeah.
Kevin Durant had a no trade clause, the Nets would have zero ability to find a deal that works the best for them. And even if there isn't a deal in this scenario necessarily, it just speaks to the greater point that, you know, it's just going to be harder to find a deal if Bradley Beal wants to be traded. Because just the odds that he plays this 5 years out, I find to be low, and I don't think we're going to be that good. Like again, what's the over under for the number of times the Wizards get to the second round in the next 5 years? 0.5.
Yeah, probably.
Like,
They haven't even been to the playoffs since John Wall left.
yeah, we had the 1 year with Russell Westbrook where we got
Oh yeah,
knocked out
Russell
by
Westbrook, yeah.
Philly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, pretty quickly, but this team's not seriously competing for anything. you know, it's going to be sort of just dependent on health and how good the role players that they bring in and out. It'll be a fluctuation between an 8 seed and a 12 seed,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and really, sorry.
It's weird, but like it's like because like they were number one at one point last year, And then I don't
Yeah.
know what happened in the locker room. Like all of a sudden,
Yeah.
Spencer
I
Dinwiddie
mean,
was like, they were saying they didn't want him, and then they just started to tank from there.
yeah. So, I mean, it does seem like things fell apart a little bit.
Mhm.
Part of it is also they were always due for a little bit of regression. I mean, they were 10-3, and a lot of it was close wins against bad teams.
Yeah.
Um, and sort of just like, basic rules of like evaluating what a record actually means. A
Mhm.
team with a good record in any sport with a lot of close wins against bad teams is sort of generally due to get a little worse. But yeah, no, things completely fell apart in the locker room. And the Dinwiddie situation, I don't really care what he says now in Dallas. He quit on the team.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, this is just again, this is not a team that's going to seriously compete for anything. And they've now completely hamstrung them for the next 5 years. And don't really have an ability to do what it takes.
To move pieces around and everything. Yeah. So like, I mean, they did get Will Barton, Monty Morris, and DeLon Wright and Taj Gibson.
Yeah. So I mean, those are all fine.
Mhm.
The way I feel every time Tommy Shepard wounds up making a trade is that I look or a signing is I look at or a free agent signing, not the contract extension.
Yeah.
Is I look at the move and I'm like, oh, pretty good move. And I'm like, probably not going to really make us that much better.
Hmm.
Like, right? Because let's be honest, right? Filling out a team with, a Monte Morris and Will Barton, that's the type of things you do if you're a contender, right? Filling different spots in your team, right?
Yeah.
The Celtics in the NBA Finals, they were a wing short and a guard short. They go out and get Danilo Gallinari and Malcolm Brogdon, right? Those are the types of holes that you fill when those holes are costing you a title. There's no use in filling those holes right now because yes, it rounds out your roster, but that roster isn't getting you anywhere.
Yeah.
And it's just Ted Leonsis has some deep seated like fear of tanking. He had a quote a few years ago where he said like we're never ever going to tank,
Hmm.
and I think he's just scared of having no one want to come to the games.
More worried
Which,
about the money and everything.
right, which is absurd on multiple levels. Um, because um, the Wizards were 24th in attendance last year, so not like things are great right now. And B, being in constant purgatory, you know, is not that exciting for a fan base. Right now, the teams that got the top picks in the draft right now, the Pistons might be worse than the Wizards this year, but the Pistons fans are a lot more excited because they got Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey
Yep.
as their future. The Rockets are going to be worse than the Wizards, but they got Jalen Green and Jabari Smith and Alperen Şengün. The Magic, they're going to be worse than the Wizards, but they got Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, right?
They
Those
got
are all
foundational young players that
right.
they can build around.
And that's what builds fan excitement.
Mhm.
Like one of my best friends is a Rockets fan, and he's infinitely more excited than me about this Rockets team this year.
Yeah.
And you could look this, it's true in any sport, right?
Hmm.
I'm a Baltimore Orioles fan, and who knows if we're actually going to make the playoffs this year, but this is a young team that's really, really exciting.
Hmm.
And the idea that fans will continuously get excited about the fact that there are theoretical games that matter for a month or two in February and March versus actually having something to build for just becomes a fallacy because eventually the fans get bored. It's kind of an insult to our intelligence.
Yeah, because like,
No.
like as the season goes along, we're just gonna be like, so what are they building on? Like,
Yeah.
what's the
Well,
direction we're going in?
right. I mean, we're smarter than that. My number one rule in sports at any given moment for any team is that regardless of whether the move is being a team like a Celtics picking up Malcolm Brogdon or Danilo Gallinari,
Mhm.
or whether you're a team tearing it down,
Mhm.
at any given moment, every decision has to be made of does this decision get me closer to winning a championship at some point, right? Obviously, the Rockets and Pistons and Magic and those teams are not close to winning a championship. But decisions they are making, everyone is, with the idea that they're laying a foundation and that each decision ultimately gets you towards it in the future because you're not going to win anything now.
Yeah.
That's not what's going on with the Wizards at all. Because they're not winning a championship anytime soon, and they're not building the ability to win championship anytime in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And hasn't really ever been that way with the Wizards.
Yeah. I mean, I was hoping that they would probably try to make a push to get John Wall back. I was hearing that Bradley Beal said he would be open to it.
Yeah, I mean,
but I don't know, like, because like the contract and everything,
yeah,
was big contract, and then you're gonna sign
it
Bradley
would be
Beal.
fun,
Mm-hmm.
John Wall, I think, is mine, and I think a lot of people agree, my favorite Wizards player of all time.
Yeah.
It would be fun in terms of like actually that it wouldn't be, my kind of secret hope was before the draft, there were a couple of different three-way trades that like wound up with Beal going to, I think at one point I did like a Beal to the Nets and KD to Phoenix and Houston getting a bunch of picks, and then the Wizards winding up with the number 3 pick of John Wall.
Yeah.
But
it worked out for everybody.
But yeah, I get Wall doing it, what he did wanting to go win, but yeah, this is not a team that's going to win. The only out is if these reports about Kevin Durant mean anything. And listen, you obviously do it. I'm a bit confused about how it could happen because everyone for some reason seems to think that the Wizards have a lot of draft picks to trade, which they don't. Because of the Stepien rule, which says that you can't have 2 straight seasons without a first round pick.
Yeah.
And right now, the Wizards have a first round pick. They traded to the Rockets in the Wall Westbrook trade. That's been, I forget who has it now. It's been traded around a few times, but it has protections on it.
Maybe the Pacers, maybe in that trade from Oladipo.
Potentially, yeah. So yeah, it if the Wizards don't make the playoffs this year, it's protected. Then it goes to like top 12, top 10, whatever. And eventually it becomes a second rounder. But those protections last till 2026. Yeah. So the first year in which that draft pick isn't potentially going to be with a team other than the Wizards is 2027. But they can't trade the 2027 pick because of the possibility that the pick doesn't get conveyed till 2026, and you can't have 2 straight years without the first round pick. So the first round pick they can trade is 2028. And if I'm the Nets, there's no reason I'm taking a trade with 2028 as the first pick. So the only way you do it is you would have to go back and renegotiate the terms and basically probably make this year's pick just unprotected, and then do a pick swap next year and then start with 2025 unprotected. And I guess you'd probably do it just because either way you're locked into these next few years with Beal. And, having Kevin Durant with Bradley Beal is probably the best thing you're going to get out of these next 2 years. If that happens, even if you have to gut much of your youngsters and sort of your rotation. But even that, a core of Kevin Durant and Bradley Beal and some of the guys around them probably still isn't enough to compete with Milwaukee.
Think so?
I doubt it.
If they keep Porzingis.
My guess is Porzingis, Rui, Denny, and Kispert would all be in the trade.
Okay.
My guess. And my guess is it will wind up with sort of a rotation of something like Morris, Beal, Barton, KD, Gafford, DeLon Wright. Maybe they're able to keep Denny and Kuzma winds up instead, and Denny becomes the 7th guy. But like, realistically, if Chris Middleton doesn't get hurt, we're looking at Milwaukee as the 2-time back-to-back champions.
Yeah.
And Giannis is the best player in the world. Right? He's, if you look at what he's doing right now, it's up there with Kareem and Shaq and Hakeem Olajuwon and Tim Duncan, Bill Russell, Wilt Chamberlain, the best bigs of all time in terms of his playoff numbers. Yeah, I think it's Milwaukee's conference for the next 5 to 10 years. And, realistically, if Milwaukee were to have the best player in the series, I'd take the rest of their core with Holiday and Middleton.
Yeah, Brook Lopez,
Connaughton, but you do it because it makes you a contender. Yeah. And
I think any team with Kevin Durant,
yeah,
contender, like.
Yeah, I mean, he's the 2nd best player in the world.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's really the only way I see anything happening, and I think it's highly, highly unlikely.
I think it's highly unlikely too. I mean, I've been hearing that Kevin Durant, maybe Toronto, like that's a sleeper team for him.
I think he's going to stay with Brooklyn.
Think so? I think
Yeah.
it's going to end up he's staying in Brooklyn too. Not
Yeah.
sure about that situation with Kyrie and everything, even though Kyrie opted in.
I
I
really
know.
don't get why KD is so insistent on latching himself to Kyrie.
Yeah, me either. I don't know. It's as far as I know, like whatever Kyrie's doing, I don't know. Maybe KD's just shows that he's not that alpha that he can be. And he
I
needs.
don't know.
Yeah.
It's hard because I generally don't love that narrative with KD just because like he was the best player on those Warriors title teams.
Yeah.
I mean, he averaged 35 a game in the 2017 finals.
Yeah.
And even, last year he's a shoe size away from carrying them to a title. But yeah, I think definitely for his legacy as well, it would be best to stay with Brooklyn. I never understood how, I've always been a defender of him going to the Warriors. I think it was the right move for him. Obviously for the Warriors, the right move for them. He saw what it meant like to be a model teammate with. I mean, Steph Curry might be the best teammate ever.
Yeah.
Like he saw what it meant, like a good organization looked like and what stability looked like. And he become just so insistent on this Kyrie thing. And it's like,
now you go from Steph Curry, probably the greatest teammate, to Kyrie, who
yeah,
barely plays games, and like when he's on the court, he's great, but like
yeah,
he's going to actually play.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's the thing. I've always been a big defender of Kyrie's game because I actually think that people kind of underrate how good he is at basketball. But
really good.
He quits on his team every year, and it's not that complicated. The year before they went to Brooklyn, that Milwaukee series in the second round with the Celtics was alarming. I mean, he stopped trying. He started demanding to be switched onto Giannis, and then I can't even explain. And then again, you see it with the series against Boston this year. Game 1, he's going for it. He's chirping with the fans. He's flipping them off. And he has, like a vintage, brilliant Kyrie Irving performance, right? It was really awesome to watch. And then just stopped getting engaged. Like he was horrible, but he wasn't really trying. I still distinctly remember game 3. He took 2 take fouls in that game. One of them was in the first quarter with the Celtics already in the bonus. So there's no reason to do a take foul if you're in the bonus. And then he had one in the middle of the third quarter with him having 4 fouls, and he took his 5th foul and a take foul. It's just stuff like that where you're just clearly disengaged from the game. And I don't get why Kevin Durant is so insistent on latching himself to Kyrie Irving.
Because they're close friends, basically.
Yeah.
Want to play with your friend.
Yeah.
I mean, I get it. I just don't know how this is going to play out next year because most of their roster is gone at this point. Most of the players they had last year is gone. So I don't know.
I mean, they're really going to miss Bruce Brown. It seems like they missed out.
I definitely said that.
They missed out on the Ayton thing. The question is Ben Simmons. Everyone forgets that he's there. If we are playing this on paper, Ben Simmons is the perfect fit in Brooklyn.
Yeah, definitely.
Because what is Ben Simmons good at? He's good at, maybe the best perimeter defender in the NBA, elite in transition, a really good passer. What does he not want to do?
Exactly.
Anything involved offense in the half court, right?
Yeah, but he can rebound, play defense, and that's what you need.
And what does Brooklyn need? They need defense. They need someone to get it in transition. They need an extra ball handler. They have 2 of the greatest individual half-court scorers in the history of the game to take the pressure off of him, right? Yeah. It's such a perfect fit if we're playing this on paper. But Ben Simmons and Kyrie are, 2 of the least trustworthy guys in the league.
Let me ask you this. Do you hear the rumors about Steve Nash and Kyrie, like that whole beef?
Yeah. Doesn't shock me. I think Steve Nash has kind of gotten a rough go of it.
Yeah.
I think he has had to deal with more, not from like an X's and O's basketball standpoint, but he's had to deal with more BS than any coach I can remember over the first 2 years.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, it's insane. And like the year before, they had all those injuries. They didn't have any of their guys together. They had the most different players play in the league. They had the most different starting lineups, and they won a 2 seed. I thought he probably should have won Coach of the Year that year. But yeah, I mean, I understand. Listen, if I'm anyone on the Nets, I think that, they have the full right to be mad at Kyrie, where basically they gave control of the team over to Kyrie and KD, right? I mean, they were out there saying, we're like co-GMs, right? This is sort of our vision. And they invested a lot of money and a lot of resources in those guys. And, they fired Kenny Atkinson because of Kyrie. Steve Nash was their handpicked head coach. And for him to turn, and regardless of like the politics of the vaccination stuff, which I find to be kind of gross anyway, that he didn't get vaccinated, but regardless, the idea that you do all of that and then that you willingly miss that many games and not reciprocate being all in, I think they have the right to be mad. Now, if looking at it in the first place, it's probably a bad idea considering the way things ended in Cleveland and Boston to turn that power over to Kyrie Irving in the first place.
Yeah.
But I fully understand why they're mad, and I think they have the right to be.
I think so too, because at the end of the day, like you said, they did pick Steve Nash, and all this turmoil is from Kyrie's not wanting to play, basically. Which is funny because, like, now that they dropped the mandate, I'm thinking, like, all right, are we going to get Kyrie for 82 games next season? I mean, we never get 82 games from Kyrie.
No.
But, like,
that's the thing.
Give us 60 games.
Yeah. And that's always been the thing. And this is something that's gotten, like, completely forgotten, but because of how much has happened with Kyrie. But the year before, there was a point where he kind of just took 2 weeks off.
Yeah,
and he said that.
What about that?
He said that after the January 6th Capitol attack, he needed like a mental health break, which like whatever. Like I'm very on board with the notion that like we need to start treating mental health like an injury. The problem was he didn't tell anyone on the team, and he just dipped. He just dipped, and that's the thing, right? Like I had a period where I had to go home from college for a mental health thing. And I emailed my professors and was like, hey guys, not going to be in class, right? It's like a basic thing you do.
Exactly.
And he just didn't say anything to them. He just dipped and no one knew where he was.
Especially since this is your job.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like
it's even smaller stuff. Like last week when LeBron played the Drew League, Kyrie was supposed to show up too and just didn't show up and didn't tell anyone.
Yeah.
It's like, he lacks some basic like human understanding of like A, common courtesy, and just B, like the basic notion of like, if I take this action, this will have consequences on this person, right?
Exactly.
Like beyond anything, big. That it's a very, very basic human thing, which he just seems to lack.
Basic communication skills. Even the GM was basically saying like, hey, Kyrie he needs to take some time to like evaluate what he wants to do with himself and like is he gonna put the team first, because it seems like Kyrie is always putting himself first, which I completely understand and I'm all for, but you're committed to this basketball team that you initially put together. You wanted to go to Brooklyn, you wanted KD to go there. You and KD was the ones who picked Steve Nash. This is your ideal situation.
Right. And that's the thing, right? Like, I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. If you're not fully committed to being a great NBA player, like that's fine, right? He can do, if that's the path he chooses in life, do that. But then it's not right to then also say, give me all this power and this is my team and I'm co-GM. And if a team invests that in you, there should be a degree of reciprocation, in the same way that, most of the time when there's a trade demand, I generally wind up being pro player because I usually feels like it's the team that screws over the player.
Most of the time.
like Anthony Davis with the Pelicans or Paul George with the Pacers.
Hmm.
I think they both had every right to ask out.
Hmm.
Um, but this is just a situation where it's like, you know, they gave you everything you wanted and you played 20 games. Um, and the other thing is, even beyond the vaccination stuff, he's just not, he hasn't been healthy. I mean, if you look at since he left Cleveland, you
Hmm.
know, or even going farther back, right? Go back to 2015, right? He gets hurt in the finals.
Yep.
So doesn't finish that year. 2016, one of the great finals performances of all time. 2017 finishes out the year, they lose in the finals. 2018, he gets hurt, misses the playoffs, doesn't show up for game 7, which is a
Right.
whole other different
Yeah.
thing.
Right before the playoffs, I think he got hurt. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. So he doesn't finish that season. 2019 finishes the season, but quits on a team in the playoffs. 2020 gets hurt, doesn't finish the season, decides not to show up for the bubble. 2021 doesn't finish out the season because he's hurt. 2022 only plays 20 games or so. So he's just more fresh, but again, quits on the team. So even if we take away the whole quit on the team thing, it's sort of a 50-50 bet if he's just going to be healthy
Yeah.
at the end of the year, and it makes sense because part of the reason he's such a brilliant basketball player is that he's not really physically imposing in any way.
Mhm.
He's not big, he's not very fast, doesn't jump very high. He's almost always going to be the worst athlete in the court. Everything that he does is basketball skill, whether it be handle, hand-eye coordination, shot making. It's why he's so brilliant as a player. But it also makes sense that just your body would have a harder time holding up with, greater athletes as your career takes a toll, as your minutes take a toll as your career goes on, especially at that size. So yeah, I would say if I'm the Nets, I'm happy if I get 55 games from him this year.
Yeah. I mean, hopefully with, I mean, if Ben Simmons plays too, maybe it won't be so much of a toll on Kyrie and we can get more games out of him.
Yeah, the Ben Simmons thing is also a whole nother thing because I still don't know when he got this back injury.
Supposedly in the offseason, but
So if that is the
it was,
case,
it was supposed to be a mental health thing. And then he said that the mental health started causing back problems.
right. So my question has always been, did the Nets know this when they traded for him? Was this some right? Because if this injury developed after the trade, it's a big bummer, but then I don't get why they wouldn't just tell us that, right? The thing I'm confused about is, was this something that was going on beforehand and Rich Paul and his people were so desperate to get him out of there that they just didn't fully tell the Nets what was going on?
I think that's what it was.
Yeah. And if that's something where, they basically weren't completely forthcoming with the Nets, that could be a big thing in the way these types of negotiations happen in the future in the league. And I still feel like it just doesn't add up.
Yeah, especially since he's still trying to get paid when he
Yeah.
didn't play games. So I
Yeah.
feel that's probably going to come up in the next meeting with the
Right. Well, he's gonna file a grievance.
Yeah. Hmm.
Which I don't even know exactly how you're gonna win that. I mean, he showed up at training camp and refused to do drills and played with his phone in his pocket,
Exactly.
got kicked out, and then didn't show up for.
Hmm. And then the only thing the Sixers was asking him was to show up to practice, and if you have like the mental health issues and everything, then just basically go to a therapist, a team therapist, and talk to them. You'll still get paid for it. You'll still get your paycheck. Just do these minimum things. And
Yeah.
you want to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a weird situation. If we're playing this game in 2K, the Nets are 1B to the Bucks is 1A.
Yeah.
In terms of East favorites. But their second and third best players are two of the more unreliable guys. That's just the hard thing with them.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Gotta see what happens.
Yeah.
Next thing I want to ask you. So have you been following the summer league?
A little bit, yeah.
Johnny Davis didn't play too good.
Did not.
Played 3 games. How high are you on the draft pick though?
I liked the draft pick when it happened.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
I think my biggest reasoning for it is that I've worked out this whole thing, where basically we kind of overthink the draft a lot
Mhm.
in the sense that if you're in the top five, um, those are going to be the five best players in the draft, right?
Mhm.
Um, and we sort of know how good those guys are.
Yeah.
Once you get outside the top five,
Mhm.
um, it becomes so much more of a projection of what that guy's going to look like going forward in the league,
Mhm.
right? Because so much of it is just how much will they get better, right? Because they're clearly not good enough to be like a blue chipper. So something that I was sort of just thinking about a little while ago was the idea that maybe teams should stop picking freshmen in the lottery outside the top five.
Yeah.
And I
Mhm.
went back and looked at it, and I did a very, very arbitrary, non-scientific of just was this a like good player? And I use like sort of CJ McCollum as like the base, that's sort of like the line of like CJ McCollum or better.
Yeah.
Um, so of the guys in the top five who were that, 19 of 21 were freshmen. Of guys 6 to 14, so non-top five lottery, only 27% of them were freshmen. And at that point in the draft, it's consistently the sophomores and the juniors and the seniors
Mhm.
who, if we're talking about guys who are going to need to get better, why don't we take the guys who have already gotten better because they weren't at this point to get drafted the year before and they clearly did something to get here, versus the freshman who was good but not quite good enough.
Mhm.
Um, so generally, I'll just always like the profile of a guy who, sort of went from a decent freshman to Big Ten Player of the Year and carrying his team to a 3 seed. In terms of the basketball questions, the athleticism was always going to be a thing, and that was always the biggest concern. You saw it in summer league, him being a step slow.
Mhm.
The thing that I still am optimistic about is that I think what he did a lot of what he did in spite of his team at Wisconsin, because he wasn't able to really play make much because of how bad his team around him was. I mean, he didn't have shooters on that team, right? If you're running high pick and roll with him, the shooters in the corner are not guys you can get out to. So now you're sort of just completely packing the paint with defenders and you in the big. And it forced him into a lot of contested mid ranges. So the efficiency isn't great. But I think a lot of that is a consequence of the situation that he was in. And if he didn't have that type of production with low efficiency, there's no way his team gets to a 3 seed. I mean, Wisconsin was picked to finish 10th in the Big Ten for a reason. Um, and the reason they didn't was because of what he did. Um, but the athleticism is always the question. And you saw it in summer league. He was a step slow. He's just going to need to get better.
Yeah.
And there's no other way around it. It might be a little bit of a long-term project, but I actually think, considering how pessimistic I am about the general direction of the Wizards, I am more optimistic than most, I think, about Johnny Davis.
Okay, that makes sense. That's a good way to look at it, especially since what is he like 22? Did he do like 3 years? Two
He
years?
did 2 years.
2 years, yeah, 2 years. So I mean, he definitely has room to improve. I'm just not quite sure where he will fit into that rotation
Yeah.
at this current moment.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what type of shooting he develops.
Mhm.
Because he's not a great 3-point shooter, but another rule I have with draft prospects is that if it looks good when they shoot it, like if the form and the everything looks clean,
Yeah.
it's something that generally develops while you're over the course of your time in the league.
Mhm.
I'm less concerned about whether the shooting develops. The biggest concern for me is, being able to consistently beat guys off the dribble. Always the biggest weakness with him. But I think at that point of the draft, it's always your best. If you're at that point of the draft, unless there's like been a massive mistake where just some guy was completely missed, you're always talking about guys who you're gonna need to improve. So if we're hoping for someone to improve, I'd rather have the guy who's already shown us that he has the ability to improve on a year-to-year basis.
Yeah. Well, Wizards gonna have some interesting things to work on. They need to fill out that roster a little more. I'm not sure if whatever they're trying to do right now, if it's going to translate this year or next 5 years. But I want to thank you for being on my podcast.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
No problem. And then we could definitely have another conversation about the Wizards probably midway through the season, just to do like a check-in.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. This was great.
Definitely, definitely. All right. Thank you for being on.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Stop recording.